We can all agree politicians, no matter the country, can be a bit silly, downright stupid in fact. Note, this video is not meant to roast any residents of these countries, but rather the foolishness of their lawmakers, so here are more stupid car laws I hate. If you haven't seen part 1, check it out later, the order that you watch them in isn't important. Displacement regulations. Oh no, big liter number equals big scary pollution. Tax the bigger displacement engines, big engines bad, super evil. Except, did you know that large displacement engines can actually be smaller than ones with a lower displacement number? Wow, shocker, who would have guessed engine size isn't determined by one singular factor. Imagine if we use this logic for everything else in life. You know how badly a boxing match would go if you just looked at someone who's 5'8" and someone else who's 6'2" and said, yeah, the 6'2" guy's larger, he's gonna win this fight. Except he might be built like a twig with no boxing experience, whereas the 5'8" dude is straight up jacked and has been boxing his whole life. The reach advantage of the 6'2" guy goes completely out the window when the 5'8" dude has a weight advantage, has a skill advantage, and so on and so forth. The same applies to engines. One number doesn't determine it all. The power, efficiency, all of that can be vastly different. In the same way that a 6'2" dude doesn't automatically win the fight because one number is bigger than the other, the 6.2 liter engine doesn't automatically pollute more than a 5 liter engine. This is a law that I've wanted to talk about for a while now, and this is why I hate lawmakers, because sometimes they're too stupid to understand nuances because it's just easier for them to take one thing and just run with it in the conversations, and then unfortunately that's what we have to live with for the next 50 years. Basically, let's just give you an example. When that dude in blue swapped a Coyote engine into his project car, he got a lot of tweets from misinformed people who said, I don't get it, a Coyote's actually smaller than a Corvette engine though. If an LS or LT can fit, a Coyote should be able to fit, which, as someone who can literally look at both engines in my garage, the answer is that the Coyote is actually the way larger engine, so that dude in blue was justified in his struggle with putting a Coyote in said car, because the big, scary 6.2 liter super pollutive, very evil 800 horsepower making supercharged V8 having pushrod using Corvette engines somehow gets 35 miles per gallon on the highway. Meanwhile, the 5 liter 435 horsepower naturally aspirated dual overhead cam 32 valve engine ends up getting 24 miles per gallon at best. And I have 65,000 miles on my Mustang and roughly almost there for my Corvette, so both of them are V8s. At what point do you have to just look at the displacement number and maybe think to yourself, maybe that's not the sole determining factor of fuel efficiency or efficiency in general. I know lawmakers are seething right now because I'm asking them to do way more math than they are comfortable with doing, because again, they like to just paint the world with a brush with a single stroke of just, this is one thing that determines everything about said thing, and it's just not like that. There's a lot of nuance to it. And part of me wonders if they ever actually asked an engineer when they originally made this law. To be fair, they might have. Engineers back then might not have known of these nuances because, like with most things in time, we get more data as more time passes, and when we get more data, we can come to better conclusions. The conclusion here, though, is we clearly have enough data to re-question this law, because displacement alone, as we've learned, does not determine an engine's efficiency. So why is that? Well, let's look at the other numbers. The Corvette has 16 valves total. The Coyote, meanwhile, has twice that, 32 valves. The Corvette also doesn't have any overhead cams. It's a pushrod. This results in its mass being extremely down low. Pushrod engines also make a lot of low-end torque, meaning that they just fall asleep on the highway, so that's why they get extraordinarily good highway miles per gallon. The Coyote is a dual overhead cam vehicle, and it actually has a total of 4 cams, resulting in massive, big, bulky cylinder head look to it, which is why that engine is just way larger visually, is way larger physically, weighs more, and in actuality, that's probably why it pollutes more, quote unquote, because it is actually the truly larger engine. Yet, lawmakers don't know that. They just think 5 liter is smaller than 6 liter. Even though this 5 liter engine is actually just straight up de facto larger than the 6.2 liter. There are a lot more nuances that go into it than even what I mentioned. At the end of the day, even though I went to an engineering school, I'm just one guy. There's plenty of other engineers who can probably put their input. Displacement alone is just a bad idea for a law to determine fuel efficiency. Ultimately, what it has resulted in is you're getting unfair taxes on engines that are actually really good for the environment and actually very fuel efficient. That's why I really just don't like this law, because it happens on smaller scales too, because you can even do this with like 3.8 liter engines versus 2.4 liter. Again, there are a lot of engines across all different vehicles that have all kinds of variables that I feel it's really stupid to just take one blanket value like displacement and say, we make a law about this, everything that no follow it bad. AKA, you have a law that did the opposite of the intended effect. Wow, I sure hope this doesn't become a trend for the rest of this video. Oops, it's becoming a trend for the rest of this video. Enter the CAFE standards. So, the EPA really thought they were cooking with this one, and we probably should not have let bro cook, because what they ended up deciding was, yo bro, what if we made an arbitrary correlation of wheelbase and miles per gallon in hopes that it will push automakers to make smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. But we do gotta make a clause that's more forgiving for larger, heavier work vehicles, since normal commuters will totally never ever buy large vehicles just to send their kids to soccer practice. This totally will not backfire on us 50 years later and result in automakers making the larger and larger cars in order to qualify for the more relaxed standards, and thus vehicles with larger and larger wheelbases with larger and larger engines in order to pass the MPG standards tied to those wheelbases, which ends up making more and more large vehicles, and the original small vehicles we intended for actually are discouraged. Cue the 50-year later time skip. Oops. This law did the exact opposite that was intended. Do note, this isn't me saying you should feel guilty for wanting or owning a large vehicle, but rather how stupid the government is for disallowing small vehicles. Okay, I believe in the freedom of choice, and given the freedom of choice, people should be allowed to buy a smaller vehicle. So why aren't they? It's not because smaller vehicles are like not competitive or that they don't sell. It's because they're literally illegal to make because of this stupid CAFE regulation that completely backfired. Basically, CAFE regulations are getting increasingly strict over the years in hopes that, hey, if we tie wheelbase to miles per gallon, there's other variables it ties to, but more or less it wants to encourage smaller cars to have more efficient fuel economy. But this comes with the unintended consequence of manufacturers being like, actually, engines aren't that efficient yet. We can't make a car that small and meet that fuel economy requirement. So we're just gonna make a larger vehicle instead to meet the more relaxed requirements for their larger end of the CAFE requirement, which results in civilians also buying larger vehicles, sometimes not out of choice, but because that's all that's on the dealership lot these days. So it's just a giant lose situation. And I know there's always gonna be some guys who may, well, small vehicles don't pass safety checks either. My retort to that is large vehicles don't either. To this day, the IIHS still finds a ton of large SUVs that fail safety regulations, be it pedestrian or even crash safety for other cars, which you constantly hear SUV owners talk about buying an SUV to be safe against other cars, which there are over half the amount of new SUVs that still fail those regulations of this model year. And that's not me crapping on SUV owners. You guys deserve better. Again, don't shoot me, I'm the messenger. Get angry at the manufacturer, get angry at this stupid law for lying to you, for cheating you, for allowing corporations to make a worse product and get away with it. I'm the type of person where I'm not gonna blame the buyer, I'm not gonna blame the individual, because what can you do as one person that will change all of the rest of the nation, much less the world, right? Whereas like people in power, politicians, companies, they obviously have more sway, so it is more of their responsibility, and it absolutely is something they should take more seriously because actual people's lives are at stake regarding this topic. I think the CAFE standard needs to be heavily revised. If you have to ask me what I think about it currently, it's probably one of the greatest failures of the American automotive legislation. It is one of the dumbest laws to ever exist, period. It is several decades out of date. It absolutely did not accomplish what it was meant to accomplish. It ended up doing the opposite of the intended effect, which is absolutely catastrophic because it's one thing to fail as a regulation and be forgotten. It's another one to actually be detrimental. I firmly believe that the CAFE regulations and standards are detrimental to the United States automotive industry, as well as the consumers of said industry. Anyways, moving on to a lighter topic for the next entry, mandatory front plates. This is definitely another really stupid law. And yeah, I know this is a complete like whiplash tonal shift because this is nowhere near as serious as the previous entry, but like look, just hand this one to me, all right? We gotta cool down after all that overheating we just experienced. Mandatory front license plates. I've thankfully never lived anywhere that required front license plates on cars, but they're really ugly. The worst part is though, if you don't have a bracket for one to hang it from, you have to awkwardly drill like into your front bumper, and that just sucks because if you've ever moved to a state that doesn't have front license plates, you just have 2 drill holes in the front of your bumper now, and no amount of putty and paint will ever make it look exactly the same again. And buying a whole new front bumper just to get rid of 2 holes is also kind of ridiculous. Another issue is sometimes you don't even want to put it dead center on your grill because if you have a performance vehicle especially, this might actually block some of its airflow. So then you have people who awkwardly put the offset front license plates. And I see a lot of non-car people who make fun of car guys who do this, where they're like, why would you do this? This is such a dumb, stupid fashion trend. It's not a fashion trend. They're doing that to prevent their intercooler from choking itself. Like radiators and intercoolers, whatever setup you have, depending if you're boosted or not. I understand why you want the airflow. And yes, it does look ugly, and I feel sorry that you guys have to get front license plates to meet these stupid laws. and you have to offset them on your bumper to prevent blocking your grill. So like, states with these laws claim it's better for identification purposes, but let's be real. What's the only actual reason they need to have a plate on both front and rear? The only reason they want to identify you better is so they can have a traffic camera that points at you better to give you more tickets and more payments and more bills. And before some brain dead Balmung who loves bootlicking Big Brother government just says, well, just don't speed then. I'm such a goody goody two shoe. Maybe you should try that sometime. Believe it or not, even if you don't speed at all, these cameras will still give you payments because there are these horrible things called toll roads that exist, and they will bill you regardless of whether or not you're speeding, and they do require you to have a front license plate to make their job easier, despite the fact it's the government's job to collect tax dollars to fix the road. So why are we paying extra for toll roads, especially when you consider that the largest fraction of road damage comes from semi-trucks, not from four-wheelers. Therefore, it's really strange that we, the individuals, have to be paying the same toll fee as a semi-truck, and I don't know, the math ain't mathing here. The reality is, this just exists because your state just wants more money from you. That's literally all I can say. Thankfully, it's not mandatory in a lot of states in the United States or in a lot of places around the world, and again, I just think it looks hideous, and aside from being hideous, it's just a weird way that they just want to overly monitor you. I guess this kind of segues into a strange, I wouldn't call it honorable mention, but a strange thing I just want to mention. Car windshield tint laws are some of the weirdest things to me. So officers usually pull you over if your tint is too dark. Again, this depends on state because these laws are designed to help them, again, identify you and also make sure you're not doing anything suspicious. Another similar law is that you also aren't allowed to wear certain headgear that obscures your face in a car, like a full face helmet, for example. Yet, you can wear a tinted full face helmet on a motorcycle. And if there's anything I've learned after motorcycling for several years, I knew quite a few friends who, you can literally blend into the crowd because you can throw a motorcycle into a bush very easily so they can't find the bike. You were wearing gloves so there's no fingerprints, and they won't even know who to look for at the airport because once your helmet is off, they never saw your face to begin with, so they have nothing to work with. They have no idea what you looked like to begin with because you had a tinted visor on a full face helmet. So you literally are just a normal human being at the airport. They will never find the guy who ran away from them, which is why a lot of states have a no chase policy for motorcyclists. That's not me encouraging bad behavior. That's me proving a point how stupid this identification system is, because with cars, there are some cars that if they wanted to run, they can run. Realistically, most officers ask you to roll down your windows when they do pull you over, and most of the time they pull you over because of something you're doing, like driving wise, like suspicious driving, not so much what they're actually seeing through your windshield. Again, I think it's silly how they disallow windshield tint and helmets inside a car because they like, oh, I want to identify your face, but a motorcyclist can literally just have that. Like, yeah, I know it saves their lives, obviously, that's why we do it on motorcycles, but again, I just think it's funny because it's like, well, technically, like, you're still on the road together, right? And one completely obscures your identity and can get away with it, and the other one, I don't know. I always think it's one of the silliest laws ever, which is why I don't take window tint laws seriously at all, and I may or may not have limo tint on my Z06 in a state that only has 25%. You didn't hear that from me, though. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you had fun. If you like automotive content, then make sure to subscribe and like this video and share it with your friends. Definitely go check out my shorts and other content if you haven't already. Check out part 1 to this series if you haven't either. See y'all next time, though. Blade Angel out.